Well, never let it be said that our Bible is dry. Our scriptures today are feeling many things. We have a lot of emotions to navigate, beginning with romance in this pair of readings from the Hebrew scriptures. For about the past 4 weeks, we've been hearing the stories of the great ancestors of nations, Abraham and Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael, and lately, Isaac, who, if you don't mind me saying, is not the most remarkable character. Really, Rebecca, Isaac's wife, is the prime mover of their patriarchal generation. And we hear the story of her call today. If you go back and compare the call of Rebecca with the call of Abraham, you'll find some really interesting parallels. Rebecca, as a young woman, is introduced to us as hardworking, generous, and intensely hospitable. She's much like Abraham when he served those 3 travelers/angels under the oaks of Mamre. A single camel needs about 25 gallons of water to recover after a long journey and needs about 10 minutes to drink it. So Rebecca would have spent nearly 2 hours hauling 250 gallons of water for a stranger's animals. She really deserved that nose ring and the bracelets. Rebecca also has Abraham's kind of faith. When asked if she'll leave her home and her family to go with this unknown man, she doesn't hesitate. She says, "I will go." I would, of course, encourage you to crack open Genesis and read this upcoming Rebecca cycle for yourself. It's about Genesis 24 to 28. We won't hear all of it in the weeks ahead, and her story and the story of her children is really great reading. She, like all the best Bible heroes, is fascinating and flawed and formidable. So today, we get this particular gorgeous moment when Rebecca and Isaac, her intended, first glimpse one another from a distance. Rebecca kind of has the advantage here. Isaac doesn't even know his father has sent for a bride. We're told that he's settled near this little oasis called Be'er Lahai Roi. Ironically, that oasis was named by Hagar in her need. It means the spring of the living one who sees me. So in this place of divine seeing, Rebecca sees Isaac, Isaac sees Rebecca, and love, only the second instance of human love we encounter in our scriptures, takes root. It's pretty dreamy, especially when we then follow it up with some of the most beautiful poetry in the Bible, the Song of Songs, so-called Spring Rhapsody. It's a perfect fit, really, because it's a meditation on looking across a distance. It's a meditation on longing, right? Perfect. And from our perspective here this morning, also really poignant. The narrator's remembering a richness of life that she's experienced before. She's remembering a beloved voice and touch, the thrill of being near to her favorite, but she's also remembering and anticipating freedom. The joy of being called out to roam through God's creation, surrounded by scent and sweetness and music. She's seeking both the one whom her soul loves and the possibilities of life beyond her walls. Her senses, her body, her recollection, and her imagination are all the avenues by which she encounters what is sacred. And leave it to dear Paul to completely ruin that vibe. We get pulled from that blissful view of the mountains directly into some righteous self-loathing, or at least into Paul's ongoing complaint against the same senses, against the flesh, which he sees as naturally opposed to the intentions of the Spirit. Now, for most of us, that feeling is also very familiar, maybe more familiar if we're people who think a lot about our spiritual failings. I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. I should probably cross-stitch that and put it on my wall. Jesus, for his part this morning, travels in 10 verses from one end of today's emotional spectrum all the way to the other. From frustration, we think frustration, this little parable is so cryptic, it's not easy to say, into a moment of praise and theological reflection, and finally to this compassionate invitation that we know so well. We know it by music most of the time. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Chapter 11 in Matthew is the first time that Jesus directly addresses his growing number of critics. After nearly every recent miracle, every profound good that he's tried to work in the world, he's encountered a new naysayer. He tells a man his sins are forgiven and is called a blasphemer. He performs an exorcism, and people accuse him of pulling his power from the demonic realm. He shares a friendly meal with Levi the tax collector, and he's criticized for hobnobbing with sinners. Even the disciples of John the Baptist, who are theoretically kind of on the same team, are uncertain with whom they're dealing. They're concerned that Jesus and his disciples don't seem to spend a lot of time in penitence and fasting, which is their brand of piety. When John himself, from prison, sends messengers to ask whether or not Jesus is the one they've been waiting for, Jesus' response is this: see and perceive. The blind regain their sight. Lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the poor receive good news. The ancient prophecies on which all of your own lessons are built are being fulfilled now. Despite all of that ongoing evidence, the resistance persists. Have you, if you have kids or if you have been a kid, have you ever watched a group of children try to agree on a game to play? Where I grew up, which was out in the middle of nowhere, a midsummer's afternoon often went something like this. Should we go to Jason's house and play table hockey? It's too nice outside. Should we go swimming? Oh, my suit is still wet from yesterday. How about riding our bikes down to Chicago Road? Meh, don't feel like it. And on and on and on until somebody floated an idea that had enough support to fly. That idea was usually, let's go get a snack. Sometimes, though, a day was spent almost entirely in negotiations and we never went anywhere. That's the parallel that Jesus has in mind with this little parable. It was common for kids at that time, just like in our time, to try on adult scenarios in play. So a game with flutes and dancing would have been a make-believe wedding, and a game with wailing and mourning would have been a pretend funeral. To his critics, and when he says this generation, Jesus is really speaking to this specific cohort who are hostile to him. He says this: John the Baptist appeared to you in the wilderness, demanding self-examination and repentance, demanding a death of self. And you called him a crazy hermit. I come to you as the bridegroom, proclaiming forgiveness and mercy and the feast of the new age, and you call me a hedonist and a sinner. Here's how Ulrich Luz paraphrases the point Jesus is making. Like children at play, you don't know what you really want. You want everything, and you can't agree on anything. In the final analysis, it may be that your contradictions reveal that you do not want at all. That you do not want at all. The core of Jesus' frustration this morning is deadly apathy. The utterly human desire to stay in one place, to be unruffled, unchallenged, unchanged. He's concerned with our resistance to the transformations the Spirit intends to work on our souls. What a paradox this year. Safety has appropriately become one of our utmost priorities. If we're people of good conscience, We're employing restraint. We're exercising a little bit of self-denial for the good of our neighbors. But God has also been calling us insistently to be profoundly spiritually invested, to think and sense and feel what's going on around us beyond our walls, to look at ourselves as a nation and begin to recognize and roll back the evil we've done under the guise of good. To live in these days is emotional. It's a roller coaster of feeling from one day to the next. We're afraid, we're outraged, we're proud sometimes, we're lonely, we're hopeful. It's a lot. It's really a lot. And the temptation is to just numb out, like the white moderate that Martin Luther King Jr. describes, who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. We have to resist that temptation. We have to look into the distance and be willing to be moved. We have to try to stay tender-hearted, to be citizens who long for a nation that still might realize its best intentions of true equality and true freedom for all, respect for the stranger, compassion, cooperation. You and I, beloved, have to decide to be individuals who keep holy desire alive. Amen.